Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Vic Fangio's defense, healthy pass rush. Oh my, if you're an opposing NFL quarterback, you have the Denver Broncos circled on your calendar because you're worried about the Broncos pass rush. We continue our position preview series heading into training camp by focusing on the Broncos pass rushers. In 2021, we break it down, we react from the South Stands to the end zone on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Director of Video Content at Pro Football Network and Broncos Analyst for the Locked On NFL Network. Contribute written content over there at 9news.com in Denver. Very excited to be back to talk Broncos football with you once again. And today we are concluding our defensive side of the ball position preview series. This week, all entire week long, we've looked at cornerback, safety, inside linebacker, defensive line, and we conclude here with the outside linebacker position. A position has many storylines and several questions heading into the 2021 NFL season. But first, let's go over a little bit of an overview of the Broncos outside linebacker position from the 2020 NFL season. Now, really last year, there was a dark cloud that was cast upon Dove Valley, and I think the optics of the entire season with the week one injury, leading up to week one, the ankle injury that kept Von Miller out of action for all of 2020. His presence on the field was evidently missed for the Broncos, but they did, in fact, get the pass rush going with Bradley Chubb, Malik Reed, and the interior of that defensive line. Vic Fangio getting creative by blitzing inside backers as well. Also, guys from the nickel. The Broncos' sack total increased in 2020 in comparison to 2019, where Von Miller was healthy, but Bradley Chubb was out. So there was a lot of growing that the Broncos did defensively last year with some of these young pass rushers. But looking at Von Miller, the injury, obviously, he was having one of the best off seasons from a physical standpoint. And then it was just a freak injury, as he would designate it, leading up to the Tennessee Titans game in week one in practice. Just a weird pop after really just doing a normal pass rush move. And then that sidelined him the rest of the season. He was hopeful he could try to come back, but that just was not the case for him last year. So obviously 2020, a bleak year from the outlook in terms of Von Miller's perspective. But he is back in 2021, folks, after the Broncos decided to pick up his club option, 18 million years. George Paton said, hey, we see value in bringing Von Miller back. Now he does enter the last year of his deal, and this is a big season for him in terms of trying to maybe get a new contract if he plays well here in 2021. Not to mention, too, he wants to retire as a Bronco for life. So there's that. But let's focus on Bradley Chubb, really a key part. His emergence last season was crucial for the Broncos and the defense. And there was some adversity that Bradley Chubb experienced in the first couple weeks of the season, really trying to get acclimated, coming back off of his injury, coming off of a torn ACL from the 2019 NFL season. There's a comfortability time frame when you get back into full-on physical football, no preseason, obviously being eased into things during training camp. For Bradley Chubb being actually in game shape, it took a couple of weeks, and really his big moment came against the New York Jets, and he had that meeting, and he went back when he was nominated for the Pro Bowl during this season. He had got very emotional about that moment. Really, he had a conversation with Von Miller prior to that New York Jets game, and Von Miller told him, you're the guy now in this locker room. You're the guy because I can't be out there. Bradley Chubb took it upon himself. He ran with it, and he became the stable part of what the Broncos defense needed from the pass rusher position. And really looking at his season, 7.5 sacks, 19 quarterback hits, and 34 pressures. I think it speaks for itself. Now, he did deal with an ankle injury down the stretch of the season, missed some action there. He's expected to be fully ready for the start of training camp here as it begins just about a week and a half now at the UCL Training Center in Inglewood, Colorado. He's going to be eased into things, but is expected to be a full-on go in the first couple of weeks of the preseason. I wouldn't imagine that we're going to see him play in any preseason games, but something to keep an eye on. There's always a possibility. But right now, everything is kind of an unknown as we head into training camp. So Bradley Chubb, his impact on the Broncos defense was huge. This is going to be a big season for him. We'll talk about that coming up here in just a moment. But let's get to his counterpart as well, the guy that had to step up opposite of him, and that is Malik Reed. And Malik Reed last year, a very impressive season. Previously, the year before, he's an undrafted rookie free agent. The Broncos, they've had a tendency to find these guys who are super talented and have some upside to him. Malik Reed, hardworking, humble, and always looking to better himself, and has really looked up to Von Miller. Bradley Chubb. He's become a big part of what the Broncos needed outside linebacker, and he stepped up as the starter opposite of Bradley Chubb. It didn't take him long to secure that role opposite of Jeremiah Tamu, really kind of overtaking him. Tamu started week 1 against the Tennessee Titans, but Malik Reed, his presence and his ability to get after the quarterback, create pressures, that got him on the field and it kept him on the field. So Malik Reed will finish the season with 8 sacks, 17 quarterback hits, and 33 pressures on the season. And now the Broncos, they're wondering, hey, who's that fourth guy going to be behind Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, and now Malik Reed? That's going to be one of the big storylines we're going to talk about a little bit later on here in the show. But take a look at the offseason additions so far. Not necessarily any key additions just yet, but Pita, Tamu, Penu, he was formerly of the San Francisco 49ers, was drafted several years ago for them, was on the Broncos' radar, potentially as one of their undrafted free agent targets if he were to be undrafted, but the 49ers had gotten him. Now he is a member of the Denver Broncos, and he's going to work in training camp to compete for maybe that 4th spot. He's going to compete against Tusca. He's going to compete against Mintz and Jonathan Cooper. And Jonathan Cooper, we actually talked about a little bit on yesterday's episode of the show as well for the defensive line, because he could play D-end, he could play edge rusher for the Broncos, but the Broncos website right now has him listed as an outside linebacker. So he's probably going to get some work there. We'll see how that plays out, obviously, at training camp. But Pita, Tamu, Penu, Jonathan Cooper, 2 offseason additions at that position alongside Mintz, an undrafted rookie free agent. We're going to keep our eyes on that 4th outside linebacker position battle, because everyone's going to be talking about Broncos quarterback this, Broncos quarterback that. Well, guess what? There are awesome position battles that will be taking place at Dove Valley. We will keep you covered not only on the Broncos quarterback competition, but we're going to keep you posted and informed on every other position battle that is going on at camp, because you, the fans, deserve that here on Broncos country. And then our key departures list, Jeremiah Tamu for the Broncos. I felt like he was a veteran for the last couple of seasons, was a veteran impact presence, not necessarily the key guy that you're going to rely on, but as a role player, he stepped up for the Broncos in the last 2 seasons and provided value in moments when the Broncos needed it the most. He made the most of his opportunities. Not necessarily the starter guy that the Broncos were looking for, but in personnel packages, rotations, he did that. And now he's going to the Chicago Bears this upcoming season. So obviously, mile high salute to Jeremiah Tamu, looking for him to take that next step in Chicago, get a chance specifically now as a veteran in the NFL. But outside of that, that wraps up what the Broncos outside linebacker overview is from last season. Coming into 2021, the new additions, the departures. But coming up here in just a moment, Broncos country, we're going to dive deep into the conversation about the Broncos training camp roster, specifically outside linebacker. We're going to touch a little bit more on some of the player-specific spotlights that we're looking at, and also we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at projections, the active roster versus the practice squad, and how I see things shaping out. But before we do that, folks, I have to tell you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of the show. That is our good friends over there, betonline.ag. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action for everything that you need regarding the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs regarding the NFL, the NHL, NBA, MLB, and UFC and MMA action. BetOnline has you covered. So before tip-off, head over to BetOnline on your laptop or mobile device to check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information today. And don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as the NFL season approaches. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Getting into the Broncos training camp roster, heading into the UC Health Training Center here in just 2 weeks, where the Broncos, 90 players will be on the football field. Fans will be in attendance on the berms. Obviously, they're going to have to stay on the berms, no autograph sessions, but Broncos football is almost back, ladies and gentlemen. We have you covered here every single day, the Locked On Broncos podcast in video format here on the YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, not to mention your favorite audio podcasting platform where you can catch it daily, bite-sized, and on the go for all your Broncos news and needs. My hope is that you make Locked On Broncos your home all season long for your Broncos coverage. From an objective point of view, we break down every angle here on the show. But with that said, let's get into the Broncos roster here, specifically at outside linebacker. Heading into training camp here, you've got Von Miller, you've got Bradley Chubb, Malik Reed, Pita, Tamu, Penu, Jonathan Cooper, Tusca, and Mintz. I want to talk about Von Miller a little bit more here. There's a lot of storylines we're going to get to a little bit later, but Von Miller, in my opinion, I think his re-entry into that position is going to be crucial. Now, last season for the Broncos, Von Miller was in the rehab room. He was with the trainers a lot, and so he was able to work with the injured players. He was still able to be a little bit of a presence inside the Broncos locker room. Various players I've spoken to, like Malik Reed, when he interviewed with us on the Locked On Broncos podcast earlier this offseason, had just talked about what Von Miller's presence was like, the big brother mentality. And Von Miller had said it himself this offseason when we've interviewed him in media scrums, is that he's really taken an interest in getting to know the younger players and helping those guys out, being a mentor for them, because that's what DeMarcus Ware did for him at one point of his career, and he found it very valuable. So Von Miller, we know he holds his pass rush summits every single year. This year he held it in Vegas, and he was given some insight to Las Vegas Raiders pass rushers like Max Crosby, also other pass rushers around the NFL, and a lot of young guys were invited to that are maybe, the undrafted route or maybe first and second year players. Von Miller believes in giving back, and I think that having that type of presence inside your locker room, I think, is really valuable. And I think that's what George Paton saw too. George Paton, and I think everybody knows, Von Miller is a damn good football player, one of the best in the NFL. However, his leadership has been very impactful for many players, not just on the defensive side of the ball. He's got very close-knit relationships with players on the offensive side of the ball. He loves every quarterback that the Broncos have. Even if the quarterbacks struggle, he loves them up. He builds them up. He's a great teammate, and that's one thing that you can't account for. So I think that for Von Miller, he's very excited about being back this year. There's a little bit of nervousness. He said he's about at 96%, and that final 4% in terms of getting into 100% is going to be being able to lean on guys in practice, the physical side, stuff you were not able to do during mandatory minicamp with the no contact rule of the CBA. He's looking forward to being able to see how he goes against guys in one-on-one situations in the 11-on-11 periods. I'm excited to see what Von Miller can do, because a healthy Von Miller is a scary Von Miller, and it doesn't matter who you put in front of him. He's going to find a way to take advantage of some situations, some matchups that he will have this upcoming season. Now, Bradley Chubb, same thing for him. When you factor in a Von Miller, Bradley Chubb on the outside of one another, it's very exciting when you look back at 2018 where they combined for 26.5 sacks. I think that the Broncos are in a position this year where Vic Fangio finally has these two together, and if they can stay healthy, that is going to pay dividends, I think, this year for Vic, for the defense, and it has a chance to propel the Broncos to the next level, being a very good defense here in 2021, not to mention with all the additions in the secondary. We go back to 2015 where the Broncos had a secondary that could play man-to-man coverage, which allowed Wade Phillips at that point to be able to send 3 to 4 rushers. The Broncos last year had to get creative. They could send 4, but often at times when they blitzed last year, they sent 5 players, a combination from guys from the nickel or also some different stunts, sending an inside linebacker. Now I think that the Broncos can really focus on sending 4 consistently, playing tight coverage, and making it more difficult for the quarterback to have a clean pocket to throw in. That's what Von Miller, that's what Bradley Chubb do for you. And then when you factor in the rotation, Malik Reed, we talked about him. That's a really good third option. The Broncos in 2015, they had Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware, Shane Ray, Shaquille Barrett. Now the Broncos, they have Bradley Chubb, Von Miller, and Malik Reed. And now they're really searching for that 4th guy. So let's take a look at Pita, Tamo, Penu, who came over this offseason. One of the key signings, we did a profile series on him. His first year ever playing football was his senior year of high school. He had 24 sacks and helped lead Timpview to a state championship in Utah. That right there is impressive in and of itself. Jonathan Cooper, obviously an offseason addition out of Ohio State, the heart condition we talked about on yesterday's episode of the show. I'm not necessarily too concerned about that because he had the operation to be able to fix that. So we'll see if that, obviously pays up the Broncos medical staff. They're going to be working with him closely one-on-one. They're going to continue to monitor that, but he should be ready to go for training camp. And then you have Derek Tusca, who obviously is a second-year player, was obviously a 7th-round draft pick in the 2020 NFL draft, a little bit undersized at the pass rush position. So his goal this offseason, I think, was to get stronger and put on a little bit more weight to be able to maybe compete against some of the best left tackles that you're going to face in the NFL. He's going to see some action in preseason, but I think that his roster spot is a little bit on the line here. And then you have Andre Mintz, who's an undrafted rookie free agent as well out of Vanderbilt, coming into the mix. He's going to compete as well. So let's get into the active roster projections. I'm imagining Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Malik Reed, Pita, Tamo, Penu, Jonathan Cooper as the active roster players for the Broncos this upcoming season. When you factor it in, you have 2 pass rushers, you have to have 2 backups behind them. Then you have to have an additional guy in case maybe your backup gets dinged up a little bit. So I imagine the Broncos are going to go into the regular season with about 5 players on the active roster. Now, who is it really going to be? I mean, it could change. I think that anywhere between Pita, Tamo, Penu, Derek Tusca, Andre Mintz, you could probably mix and match one of those 3 players together for that 4th or 5th spot. But the Broncos, I think, are going to carry those 5 players into this season. Now, in terms of the practice squad, I imagine Derek Tusca is probably going to get a little bit more time to refine and develop a little bit. And then Andre Mintz. You need more pass rushers in general, just on your active roster with 5, but you need guys that can come in and maybe play special teams if injuries happen, because there are utility players, safeties, linebackers, cornerbacks, a lot of those players. And sometimes you'll see some offensive players play some of those special teams roles, but mainly it's a lot of the defensive players that do that. So you need some guys that can maybe contribute on special teams. I think Mintz, with his frame, and he's got a really fast get off. That's been something that's been talked about at Broncos rookie minicamp, mandatory minicamp. So maybe he's going to get a little bit more time to refine some of the skills that he has, but being able to be stashed away in the practice squad, maybe even designated as a protected player, I think is what the Broncos might do with him. So we'll keep an eye on that for the Broncos here. But that will be the training camp roster for outside linebackers. The Broncos prepare to get back on the field here in just about a week and a half, 2 weeks at the UC Health Training Center. And coming up here in just a moment, Broncos country, we are going to discuss the storylines for the outside linebacker position in general. But before we do that, I have to tell you about the 2 other sponsors of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, RockAuto.com and Built Bar. With RockAuto.com, this episode is brought to you by them, a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible to stock all the parts that you need for your vehicle in a traditional chain storefront. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouses happen to carry, when you have computers with access to RockAuto.com at home and in your pocket? Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership when you can get safe and reliably low prices at RockAuto.com? They have everything that you could be looking for as well for your car, whether it's engine control modules, brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or even new carpet. They've got everything that you need. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. And when you go to RockAuto.com, go there right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On Broncos in their "How did you hear about us" box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts that your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. And our good friends over there at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is on the market today. And ladies and gentlemen, my daily go-to is peanut butter brownie, not to mention cookies and cream, double chocolate, salted caramel. And one of the reasons I love Built Bar, ladies and gentlemen, is because they have a flavor for everybody. If you love cherry, if you love cherry barcia, if you love raspberry or mint brownie, they've got a flavor for you. Not only are Built Bars the best tasting protein bar on the market, they're also the healthiest for you as well, because the bars, they taste legitimately like a candy bar, but they contain 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. That is the best bang for your buck, ladies and gentlemen. It is my daily go-to here at the Locked On Broncos podcast, and I want you and your loved ones to get your taste buds on a box of Built Bar today by going to Built.com. And when you go to checkout, use promo code LOCK15. That's going to get you 15% off your next order today. Once again, promo code LOCK15 is going to get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. And as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, just a reminder, folks, after you're done listening to the Locked On Broncos here on YouTube or your favorite audio podcasting platform, I want you to check out the Locked On Today podcast hosted by Pita, where he runs down every major professional sports using the local experts on the biggest stories covering their teams. You have the NBA Finals ongoing with the Phoenix Suns, the Milwaukee Bucks. Peter Bukowski has you covered there with all the latest storylines about what you need to know about the NBA Finals matchup where the Phoenix Suns currently hold the lead. But now, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue on with our Broncos pass rusher storylines entering the 2021 NFL season. First and foremost, I think we would be remiss to not talk about Von Miller being in the final year of his contract here in 2021. Now, there's some interesting developments here with Von, because Von has recently stated he wants to play 5 to 7 more seasons. Now, obviously, being at the early part of his 30s, it's certainly possible. We've seen other players do it. And if Von Miller can stay healthy here in 2021 and he puts on a high level of performance, not only do I think that the Broncos will extend him, but I also think he'll have some longevity to be able to make it for another 5 to 7 years in the NFL. Now, as those years go on, I don't think we can get too far ahead of ourselves. But if Von can stay healthy, like I mentioned, and play well, he wants to retire as a Bronco. But could we realistically see him remain on the Broncos for the next 5 to 7 years? There's so much change that can happen, I think, even in a year in the NFL. It's hard to jump that far ahead. But is 2021 a make it or break it season for Von Miller? If Von Miller comes back, stays healthy in all the games that the Broncos play, but doesn't have necessarily the bigger numbers that people were hoping for, do the Broncos bring him back after 2021? I think you have to look at it from a multitude of ways. In terms of statistics, right? I think a lot of people look at the overall number of sacks that he gets, and that, a lot of people, they look at the stat sheet, they look at the box score, and they just say, okay, hey, look, we're not going to run with Von Miller. We shouldn't bring him back because he only had this amount of sacks. I think that if you look at it from that lens, it's very one-sided, and I think it's the wrong type of thinking. Now, when we look at overall pressures, quarterback knockdowns, the ability to force incompletions, not to mention also force hurries where a quarterback throws it quicker than he wants to, and maybe it leads to a turnover or an interception. There are things that are accounted for in terms of the film that you don't get on the stat sheet necessarily. So forced takeaways, things like that. But I think that Von Miller has value being in this Broncos locker room regardless, and I don't think that we can necessarily have these major expectations for him coming off of a season-ending injury from last year where he hasn't played football in a year and a half. If you're coming into the season and you're saying to yourself, in order for the Broncos to bring back Von Miller, he needs to get 15 to 16 sacks, or else you don't do that. I don't think we can enter that season with that as a realistic expectation. I think for Von Miller, if he comes back and his impact is leading to the Broncos defense having success, regardless of stat sheet, box score, whatever you may look at, I think that the Broncos need to seriously look at extending Von Miller, bringing him back just for his presence and his ability to disrupt plays in general. And specifically coming off of a season-ending injury, it may take some time this season for Von to get acclimated. It may take him up to 4 or 5 games, similar to what we saw with Bradley Chubb last year coming off of ACL. It took him until that New York Jets game in week 4 to be able to really get to a rhythm where he felt comfortable and didn't second-guess himself. So keep that in mind, Broncos country. When we get into the start of the season, if Von's not getting sacks right away, I want you all to keep that into your consideration. Will Bradley Chubb receive a contract extension here in 2021? The Broncos, they picked up his 5th-year club option. I think that there is definitely a strong chance. I would be very shocked if the Broncos decided not to give Chubb a contract extension. I think that we'll see an extension with Chubb. It could happen during training camp, but I think more than likely it'll happen throughout the season. I don't think that Denver is going to allow Chubb to go out and test the free agency waters. The Broncos organization is very high on him. George Payton likes him. From people that I've spoken to around Dove Valley, Bradley Chubb is more than likely a safe lock to be on the roster in the long-term future for this Broncos team. So I do believe that, yes, Bradley Chubb will receive an extension here in 2021. Our third storyline, what will be the expectations for Malik Reed? This is really a contract year for Malik Reed as well. I think that he has exceeded expectations from where he originally came in as an undrafted rookie free agent out of Nevada. He's been able to be an impact player for Vic and the Broncos defense and that position room specifically. His fingerprints have been on the success of the Broncos defense and the good plays that they've been able to generate. He's been a guy that's been very disciplined against the run. I mean, not many runs get to the outside of him. He's been very good at tackles for, a loss behind the line of scrimmage. I think that Malik Reed is going to play himself into a contract year as well. And a lot of people are talking about, is there a similar situation with Malik Reed that the Broncos ran into with Shaquille Barrett? I think a lot of it really depends on where Malik Reed is. Like I mentioned, Malik is super close with Bradley Chubb and with Von Miller. So does he view himself as he needs to start right away? I don't know if that's the case for Malik Reed. I think internally for every player, they want to start. Don't get me wrong about that. But I don't know whether or not Malik Reed is okay with saying, hey, look, I know that I'm going to get reps on the field. I don't need to start to know that I'm going to make an impact when I do get on the field. Malik Reed does not strike me as that type of person that is thinking selfishly about, I need to get sacks. I need to be starting. He's more of a team player, and he's very, I think, disciplined. He's very loyal to his teammates. But also, I think at the same time, you look at the business nature of the NFL, you have to do what's best for you. Will the Broncos approach that type of situation with Malik Reed? I don't think that they will, because I think that Malik has seen some success specifically where his arc has been as an undrafted rookie free agent. The Broncos have believed in developing him, and I think he's going to get more of an opportunity to do that. I think that we will see an extension of some point for Malik Reed this season. So keep an eye on that. And then our fourth and final storyline is, can Pita Penu find his home? Ever since being drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in one of the later rounds, he's always had the physical traits to be a dominant and quick pass rusher. However, he's never really been in a situation that has given him the opportunity, whether it's the Atlanta Falcons, the Seattle Seahawks. He's been able to make some plays on special teams. He's got size, he's got speed, and he's got that physicality to him that I think will be beneficial. However, he's now in a 3-4 defensive scheme, which I think will give him more opportunities to showcase what he is good at. He's traditionally played in a 4-3 scheme as a defensive end, has been able to go against the Broncos in training camp practices in the past when he was a member of the San Francisco 49ers. So can Pita Penu find his home in Denver? I'm going to say a bold projection here. He will be that fourth guy alongside Jonathan Cooper this upcoming season for the Denver Broncos. But ladies and gentlemen, Broncos country, I hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode of the show. That will conclude what we have talking about here today. That wraps up our position preview series. Monday's episode, Lockdown Broncos, it's going to be a special one as we will be joined by Broncos safety PJ Locke, who last week in our safety position preview, I said was one of the most underrated players on the Broncos roster. I've been following his offseason program. I've watched him on tape on the All-22. There's things about him on the special teams. He is a big motor, high-energy guy, and we're going to have him here on the show to talk about his expectations coming into training camp here in just a couple of weeks, not to mention reflecting on his season last year, no preseason games, and still having to make the roster. What was going through his mind? What challenges did he face? What did he learn about himself throughout last season? We're going to break it down on Monday's episode of Locked On Broncos. We get PJ Locke here on the show. I'm Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos. Enjoy your weekend, Broncos country. I look forward to seeing you on Monday for a brand new episode of the show.